I'm very pleased to be joined by Bob MANKOFF, cartoon editor of The New Yorker and president of the Cartoon Bank. Bob is also a commentator on the role of humor in American life and a frequent TV talk show guest. And fellow cartoonist David SIPRESS, whose cartoons appear in The New Yorker since 1998, and many other publications, including Harper's, Forbes, Reader's Digest, and The Washington Post. He's also the author of 8 books of cartoons. Welcome to CityWide. Bob, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. What's a cartoon worth?
Well, on the Cartoon Bank, you can get it for $19.95 the PowerPoint presentation, or you could pay upwards of $2,000 for the original. I think it's worth a lot, a New Yorker cartoon especially. We want it to be funny, but I think the idea behind the New Yorker cartoon is to use this particular form as a medium for communicating ideas.
So what's special about the medium?
Well, I think what's special about the medium is that it's sort of like a cognitive arrow. It appeals immediately to you. It reveals a lot about the cartoon and about you. Often, let's say I have a cartoon. This is not one I don't think we have to show here, and it shows a gallows, normal steps going up to the gallows. And then there's a little ramp for the handicapped. Well, you laughed. Well, that went right through. Just in hearing it, you laughed. You can't take back that laugh. You can't retract it. It means that your feelings, whether you support, ramps for the handicapped in theaters and everything, are a little ambiguous. And the cartoons always show us, through humor, that life is complicated, that it isn't black and white, that it has ambiguities, and it will, despite our respectability and our politically correct attitudes, it really reveals what people think about things.
How do you tell a story in a single panel?
Well, for me, there's sort of no other way. I'm sort of addicted to that short form, and it's how the story comes into my head. So when I feel like I want to say something about something, it's just instinctive. I think of a picture, or I think of a line, or I think of both together, and then it's just there on the page. And so what I love about it is that a very complicated story can be boiled down to something very simple and, of course, most important, very funny, which ultimately I think is the best way to communicate anything. So,
I think the other thing I would say is it's not actually a story. You supply the bookends to the story, so it has much more freedom than a narrative form. In one of the cartoons I have here, mine, where the guy's on the phone saying, no Thursdays out. How about never? It's never good for you. Well, that's a little freeze frame. You can make your own story out of that. And one of the nice things about cartoons versus actual stories, they're not boring. You don't have to put, maybe you don't like a cartoon in the New Yorker, maybe you don't like David's cartoon and my cartoon. We hope you do, but really, we don't really care that much about it. What we care about is that we like it. And that's really part of the New Yorker ethos, is a type of honesty. We don't focus group you. As a New Yorker, as cartoon editor, we say we like it. Then when a young cartoonist, not like David, but when
I used to be.
I remember it well. Comes and they say, well, what do you want me to do? I say, I don't want you to do anything except something that you like. And we hope that this sequence exists where you like it, we like it, and the audience like it. But if it doesn't, no big deal.
Well, let me ask you: Does the audience look at a cartoon differently because it's in the New Yorker? In other words, if you took the same cartoon and had it in another publication, would the expectations for the cartoon be different?
Well, I think if it appeared in Big American Breasts,
well, it
might be looked at differently, but we don't publish in those publications.
Well, I think that the cartoons in the New Yorker, there's such a varied amount of voices, so many different kinds of voices, that it's really hard to answer that, except to say that people have really nowhere else to look for cartoons. The New Yorker is the place. It's always been the place people look first for cartoons, and in fact, it's almost like a brand name. A New Yorker cartoon is what a cartoon is to people. And so I think one thing that we as cartoonists feel certain of is that we're getting the audience that we would most like to communicate to being in the New Yorker. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is the New Yorker is an aspirational magazine. Certainly for me growing up, as a kid in Queens and then later when I went to college, I wanted to be like the people in the New Yorker who wrote these things, who did these things. Therefore, even if there was something I didn't understand, I gave it the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to find out what was understandable about that. So the New Yorker has a greater freedom with its demographic to experiment. And from Harold Ross to William Shawn, Gottlieb, Tina Brown, David Remnick, we do. Sometimes we run a feature called I Don't Get It, the New York Cartoon IQ Test. And I like running cartoons sometimes. I don't want everyone to get every cartoon, because that's why it's a real art form. Sometimes you will do something. Most cartoons are pretty explicably funny. They're making fun. They're either using ridicule or parody or satire in the ways that we're pretty used to. They're mapping one thing on another. They're fooling around. But sometimes cartoons can be funny for no reason that's completely explicable. It's a wonderful Jack Ziegler cartoon, which it's called The Empire State Building and a Side Order of Fries. That's all it is. It's like a little bit of dada, a little bit of just fun of the mind. It's ludic, it's playful. And that's what, in the New Yorker, like David said, we can have a wide range, like you're going into an exhibit of humor, of different voices, rather than something that's in the Saturday Evening Post, which is, the point is, everyone's got to like it and get it.
Well, the other two publications that had great cartooning histories that were also what you might call lifestyle publications. One was The Village Voice,
right.
Jules Pfeiffer's,
sure.
and now a whole series of artists. And the other was Playboy, a whole generation that grew up on the Playboy cartoons. Some people said that they only read Playboy for the cartoons.
When I was a boy, I've always wanted to be a cartoonist since I was a little kid, actually. Playboy was only available when I went to the barber shop, and that was a great pleasure. But mostly, I always only thought of cartoons in terms of the New Yorker. In fact, as a kid, I drew cartoons, and then I'd cut them out and paste them in over Charles Addams or over Thurber, because I'd only really associated a particular kind of cartoon with the New Yorker, which is different from any other kind of cartoon. So,
yeah, Playboy's cartoons, and there were many great cartoons in Playboy, although,
and some of the same cartoonists in both.
And some of the same cartoonists, but for the most part, it was a single note.
Yeah, exactly.
Which was sort of this retro, now especially, type of sex cartoon. And when we do cartoons like this now, even in the New Yorker, because it's loosened up, they're sort of meta cartoons. They're meta jokes.
She made a clean breast of that tradition.
Yeah. But if we have people, people in bed, the woman might be saying, like in one of my cartoons, it's not what it is. It's making fun of that joke form itself rather than, a Playboy type.
I wanted to ask you, one of the cartoons I was looking at earlier is a woman who's basically saying, I don't remember anything that you've said during the course of our relationship. Do men and women look at cartoons in a different way?
Well, it's interesting.
Before I have to interrupt you, because one of the things cartoonists hate is
getting the gag line wrong.
So wrong. Yeah. so very, very wrong. The woman is saying to the...
I'm sorry, dear, I wasn't listening. Could you repeat what you've said since we've been married?
Right. So I do want...
Well, that was just the setup because I know that they were going to show it on the screen.
But I think, well, why don't you handle that first, and then I can contradict you.
Well, only being a man, I'm not really sure, but I know that... It was interesting, several years ago I did a book of cartoons called Sex, Love, and Other Problems. And when I showed the manuscript to my wife, it had 100 cartoons in it, and she said, the man is speaking in every one of these cartoons, which is something I never would have noticed had she not pointed it out. And that said something about a kind of male point of view that I had, and she suggested just arbitrarily changing the speaker in half the cartoons and see what happened, and they wound up being a lot funnier that way. And I learned something from that about trying to do cartoons not always from a man's point of view, not so much because I want to communicate to women in a different way, but simply because it does make things funnier to have that openness to both points of view.
Well, I mean, I also, from a man's point of view, my cartoons, although my extensive experience with cross-dressing has given me more of a latitude. The men's and women's cartoons tend to be somewhat different. Men, and I'm sure it's cultural, but men's humor is, for the most part, certainly in American society, very different. You can see the extremes of it if you listen to talk, shock jock radio and stuff. Much of men's humor is a type of mock fighting or aggression. it's insulting. It's insulting. It's insults exchanged among friends. Women don't do this. They don't insult each other. They don't. I think it's men have much greater real aggression, and the mock fighting is necessary so they don't actually hit each other.
You've never hung out with a group of teenage girls.
No, well, they're mean. They're mean. But it's a different. But the point is, it actually is. It's different. Men's cartoons also, overall, are more gag centers, manipulative. Where when I was coming up cartooning, the sincerest compliment you could get, especially from the older cartoonists, was, "I wish I had that idea." Well, that means the ideas are fungible. They're interchangeable, that anyone could have any. Most women's cartoons come from a more personal point of view about things that they are actually interested in. And personally, I think the New Yorker are actually interested in getting more of these types of cartoons, more of sort of the comedy of manners. I mean, there's a gag cartoon. I don't know. You put a chicken on a psychiatrist's couch. Well, that's just a little fantasy thing. And if you're a good cartoonist, you can come up with something for that chicken. Hey, why? The psychiatrist, might be saying, "Why do you think you crossed the road?" It's a funny cartoon. It's a little bit about psychiatry. It's basically about cartooning. But a woman's cartoon might be an actual slice of life. Someone, applying for college, like in a Barbara Smaller cartoon, saying, "I'm most interested in the college that has the most closet space." It's an actual thing that women are thinking about, and I think we need sort of the yin and yang, although there's big overlap, obviously.
We're going to talk a little bit about political cartooning and the business of cartooning when CityWide continues right after this.
Are your kids getting enough art? Whether through poetry, dance, music, or drama, the arts open the doors to creativity. As a mother and teacher, I know that arts education can help our children develop confidence and a better understanding of the world around them. Even if you have just 30 minutes a week, get your kids more involved in the arts and think about the kind of world we can leave behind for our children and our children's children.
Art. Ask for more. AmericansForTheArts.org.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with cartoonists Bob MANKOFF and David SIPRESS. There's a long tradition of political cartooning. In this country, it goes back to Revolutionary War days, picked up steam with the Nash cartoons about Boss Tweed, and right through to Doonesbury. How do you capture a political moment in a cartoon?
Well, doing political cartoons and doing editorial cartoons and doing the kind of cartoons that we do is a somewhat different kind of endeavor. And so the political cartoonist, per se, is someone who will probably try to go more directly at an issue, perhaps in an advocacy kind of a way. When you're doing cartoons to the New Yorker, it's a little trickier and I think a more subtle and interesting art. I try to find a way. Every week when I submit my batch, I try to submit several ideas based on my feelings about a political issue. And every once in a while one sells. It's not easy to get that kind of cartoon in the New Yorker, but what I try to do is go, this is going to sound strange, but I sort of go to my feelings, what makes me angry, what confuses me, because usually that winds up being the things that confuse or anger other people. And then I try to make a joke about it that doesn't advocate for a particular point of view, but takes a sort of longer look at sort of how ridiculous it all is. And perhaps makes fun of everybody, not just George Bush. And so it's a really interesting kind of art doing it for the magazine because it's in some ways more limited than doing an editorial cartoon. You can't label somebody a general, and you can't have them saying things that don't sound like real conversation because part of a caption is that it sounds real and it sounds convincing. So that's sort of how I go about it.
Here's a recent editorial cartoon that I enjoyed. The man is saying the feds got a search warrant and found $90,000 in a congressman's freezer. And the woman says, "I don't believe it. The feds got a warrant."
Right, and you can see their way. They're allowed a lot of latitude. Now, in a topical cartoon like that, first of all, it's it's difficult for us. The magazine basically closes on Thursday and Friday. It's not a daily. You're not going to get into your mailbox till Wednesday or maybe Thursday or Friday. So we can't deal that because the news cycle events may overtake us. Also, we won't tend to be that didactic. If we talk about, an issue, it'd be pretty general. For example, if I did a cartoon, I wouldn't be doing a cartoon about Katrina, but I might do a cartoon that played off of the phrase "act of God," in showing the ludicrousness. I mean, I did a cartoon with a lawyer on the phone saying, "Act of God? No problem, we sue God." And that's a general cartoon, and that type of cartoon, and the thing I personally like about the cartoons we do is they have much longer shelf life. This cartoon about
a year from now people may not
won't know it is. So when we
Right.
came out with the complete cartoons in the New Yorker, year by year, you're looking in 1945 and 54, you're seeing what remains, sort of the residue. So we are different than editorial cartoonists. Also, we are not tied to the political structure, even of the New Yorker or certainly a newspaper.
So let me ask you about what is probably the most famous or infamous series of cartoons in recent memory, and those are the ones that published in Denmark with the depictions of the Prophet Muhammad that set off riots in countries that probably had never heard of Denmark. They were burning Danish flags. You couldn't even buy one in New York City. I don't know where they got
burned
them.
Danishes, and that, how that makes terrible
Couldn't find
taste.
a Danish for days.
Yeah.
Is it power? Were these just and obviously you're not foreign affairs experts, although you've studied it. Was this just
foreign affairs experts aren't foreign affairs experts?
Was this just a put up, or do cartoons actually have the power to inspire riots? And let me ask you more pointedly: you open up the newspapers and you read about death threats against people because of cartoons. How do you react to that?
I react. I hide. But I increase my security force, which is over 15,000 now where I live.
I think that cartoons do have. I hesitate to make a general comment about it. I can only speak from my own experience that cartoons do often have the power to create a reaction. In this case, the reaction was hyped and pushed ahead by certain people who had agendas, I think, that made this much larger than it probably would have been. In my own experience, I first of all like to believe that if I do, for instance, I did do a cartoon about Katrina, and it did get published in the New Yorker, and I got lots of reaction from people, positive reaction, and that made me feel good because I know that this very short form with this very direct method of communication can say more than a long article can in a way that people don't forget and tell other people about. And so I think that cartoons are a really wonderful vehicle for saying something about the culture, something about politics.
Have any of your published cartoons ever offended somebody?
Recently, I got my first death threat, actually. I did what I thought was the most harmless cartoon I'd ever done. It was a joke.
It really offended me. That's why I wrote that.
It was a joke about, when kids grow up, you draw lines measuring their increasing height. Well, I did an elderly couple starting at age 65 to age 80, and he's getting shorter and shorter. I got an extremely angry letter from someone who said, "Dear Mr. Cypress, you must be a very young man, otherwise you wouldn't have this insensitivity towards older people. I hope one day you grow older and you understand how much we suffer. Better yet, I hope you drop dead before that happens."
I got the same letter. I think there is, what people don't realize about humor is that nothing is funny in and of itself. It depends on the context. There's a normal situation and there's a violation along what I call like a vector of desire. So we can laugh about cartoons about adultery, but not about incest. So it's your sensitivities. In terms of these cartoons, about Islam, Muhammad, I bet they were perfectly fine. They were just standard cartoons. The reaction to them was not a real reaction, but was, a political movement. Also, the cartoons express a point of view. All humor possesses a point of view, and the point of view usually in cartoons like this is, you're an idiot. It's actually a moral point of view. It might be wrong, but it says really, we think it's stupid. We think it's idiotic that you think that you're going to have sex with virgins by blowing up people. And we think it's even more idiotic that now you're saying the interpretation is they're not virgins, they're raisins. Because it's ridiculous to have sex with raisins. I can see the virgins thing, the raisins I'm really offended at. But I think they make a point of sort of what I call the morality of laughter, and all religion must ban. It's just at different times. If you go back, if you really want to read the Bible, you'll see they're always going to they're against humor completely. against dissent, and they've got to call it blasphemy, because religion, especially because of its crazy beliefs, all of them, is subject to ridicule. And ridicule is actually a very good test of whether something is full of you know what. Because, and it's why they can't, you see, they can ignore argument. Everyone can ignore argument, but they can't ignore laughter. And that's really why they want to ban it, and if necessary, kill the people in the United States.
Neither one of you had formal training as artists. Is that right?
That's true. Yeah.
How do you know?
Oh,
Excuse me. Excuse me. I was at the Sorbonne.
That's true of me.
I
don't know that, Bob.
Cast of Desert Islands for over 2 years. I'm very offended. Actually, I went to the High School of Music and Art, so I had formal training.
And which did you study?
Where did the money go for the piano lessons? I know, that's that joke. But yeah, so I mean, but I think formal training in cartooning is something that actually hurts you, in that there's something about the form that's a little bit primitive, and therefore communicates actually better than many ideas would be killed by good, quote unquote, good representational drawings.
But it's all about evoking a reaction in people.
Yeah, well, originally it's about evoking a reaction in yourself.
But that can be done in, as we've said before, there are a million different styles. Charles Addams, his cartoons are so beautifully drawn. Everything is observed so carefully and beautifully, and someone else, such as myself, may have a much more primitive and direct approach to drawing. And as long as the art of the drawing is working to communicate the idea, no matter what style it is, no matter how much training you've had, if that's working, then you draw well as a cartoonist. So.
I want to ask you just a little bit about the business of cartooning and how somebody would get started.
We've had no formal training in business either. So.
Excuse me.
Well, I was going to ask you, Bob.
Wharton School.
Bob, do you get a salary or just a draw?
Ooh. Well, I have.
I should leave the room.
Could you leave the jokes, for God's sake? But well, I mean, I'm well sacrificed. I'm president of the Cartoon Bank. I'm a cartoonist for the New Yorker, and I'm cartoon editor for the New Yorker. Now, because you come back around politics, you might say, well, is there a conflict of interest here? You're the cartoon editor. You help and select the cartoons. You're president of the Cartoon Bank. You're licensing the cartoons, and then you're doing the cartoons yourself. And I just want to assure you that I've thought about it, and I've appointed a blue ribbon committee. It's going to take time. You understand how this is.
The theory is, if you represent everybody, what's the conflict?
Yeah, but also I'm heading that blue ribbon committee. So
what would you say to somebody who wanted to get started as a cartoonist?
I'd say don't ask what it's going to take to get started as a cartoonist. You know, I tell you a number of things. I really do give talks on this, and through the New Yorker and the Cartoon Bank, you can make a living at it, and sometimes a pretty good living, but it's very, very difficult. But when I go to schools, I say, you got your whole life to work in an office. The office will always be there, but you only have a short period of time. If you have talent and are creative and love to do this, so seize it. The office will be there, and you can make a living at it, but most likely, in all creative, whether you want to be an actor or play baseball, this is hard. You know what I mean? So don't think about the hardness of it now. Use your youth and your ambition to take a shot.
I would agree. I mean, when I was young and I had choices to make, at that time, especially it was the 60s, and there was a kind of, the atmosphere was such that people were able to make crazy choices based on desire, and that's what I did. I'd always want to be a cartoonist. I was on the road to doing something else, and one day I said, I'm really unhappy. I'm young. This is my chance. And I never looked back.
But the actual business is that by appearing in the New Yorker, for instance, it becomes a showcase. The cartoons get reprinted and licensed many times over in the Cartoon Bank. Sometimes a cartoon can earn $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 over time by its licensing. And the New Yorker pays a pretty good premium also. Also, then there's advertising. So whereas, let's say the New Yorker range of New Yorker cartoons might be about $1,500 moving, depends on whether you have a contract. An advertising job literally could be lots and lots of money. So there are ways to make a living, but the great thing about it is that when someone comes in, I said, if you have this talent, you probably can be in advertising and another thing. But at the end of the day, if you're in the New Yorker, you're going to have the books like David SIPRESS has. You're going to have done your own thing. And if you went into advertising, you're going to have vodka ads that nobody's going to be interested in.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists, Bob MANKOFF, cartoon editor of The New Yorker and president of the Cartoon Bank, and cartoonist David SIPRESS, whose cartoons appear in numerous publications, including The New Yorker, and the author of 8 cartoon books. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us.